Jesus speaks. Your healing is not finished. Jesus ka sandesh. Tumhari chikitsa abhi puri nahi way. Today, Jesus speaks this word directly over your body, and I am asking you to stay until the very end, because the part written specifically for your healing comes later in this message, not at the beginning. Something in your physical body, or in the body of someone you love, has been wrong for far longer than you expected it to be, and I am not going to speak around that today. I am going to speak directly into it. I know the specific weight of a body that will not cooperate with your plans. Some of you have lived with a condition so long that you have stopped mentioning it to people, because explaining it again feels more exhausting than simply enduring it quietly. Some of you are waiting on test results right now, checking your phone more than you want to admit, rehearsing what you will do if the news is bad. Some of you are watching someone you love grow weaker in ways that terrify you, and you feel powerless every time you visit them. I want you to know before anything else in this message that I have not looked away from any of it, not for a single day. I want to take you to a pool called Bethesda, where a man had been lying for 38 years, unable to walk, waiting by the water because of a belief that whoever entered it first when it stirred would be healed, but always arriving too late because he had no one to carry him in quickly enough. 38 years is longer than many entire lifetimes in that era. I walked up to him specifically, out of all the sick people lying around that pool, and asked him a question that sounds almost strange on the surface: do you want to get well? I asked it because after 38 years, wanting healing and being resigned to sickness can start to feel like the same thing, and I wanted to wake something back up in him before I did anything else. I am asking you the same question today, not because I doubt your answer, but because I want you to feel yourself answer it, out loud if you can. Do you still want to get well, or have you quietly settled for managing this instead of expecting it to change? I told that man to get up, pick up his mat, and walk, and he did it immediately, 38 years of paralysis reversing in the time it took him to stand. I want you to notice that he did not need to believe a theology about healing first. He did not need years of preparation. He needed one instruction and the willingness to obey it despite decades of evidence that told him it was impossible. Whatever has felt impossible in your body for years, I am not intimidated by the length of time it has lasted. 38 years was not too long for me. Whatever your number is, it is not too long either. I want to speak to those of you dealing with a skin condition, an autoimmune disorder, or any illness that has made you feel unclean or untouchable, isolated even from the people who love you because your body has become something you feel you need to hide or apologize for. I think of the man with leprosy who came to me, and in that culture leprosy meant complete social exile, forced separation from family and community, a life spent shouting unclean to warn others away from him. He knelt before me and said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." I want you to notice my response. I did not just speak a word from a safe distance the way I could have. I reached out my hand and touched him before he was healed, while he was still considered untouchable by everyone else. Then I said, "I am willing," and he was healed immediately. I am willing to touch what everyone else has treated as untouchable in you. Your condition does not disqualify you from my hand. It is exactly what draws it toward you. I want to speak to the parent sitting beside a hospital bed right now, or remembering what it felt like to sit there, watching a child suffer in a way that feels entirely outside of your control as a parent whose whole instinct is to protect. Jairus, a synagogue leader, came to me and fell at my feet, begging me to come heal his dying daughter, and while we were still on the way, messengers arrived to tell him she had already died, that there was no longer any reason to trouble me further. I told him plainly, "Do not be afraid, just believe." I went to his house anyway, past the mourners who were already weeping, took the girl by the hand, and told her to get up. She did, immediately, as if she had only been sleeping. I want you to hear what I said to Jairus if the news about your situation has already started to sound final. Do not be afraid, just believe. The report that says it is too late is not always the final report I am working from. I want to speak now to those of you who have been to doctor after doctor, spent money you did not have on treatment after treatment, and are exhausted by a system that has not yet given you the answer you need. I think of the woman who had suffered from bleeding for 12 years, who had spent all she had on physicians, and instead of getting better, she had grown worse. I want you to notice that I do not dismiss the value of doctors in this story. She had genuinely sought help through every available means. But when every available means had been exhausted, she reached for something beyond the physicians, pressing through a crowd just to touch the edge of my robe, and immediately her bleeding stopped. If you feel like you have exhausted every medical option available and are still without an answer, I want you to know you are not out of options. You are exactly at the place where reaching for me becomes the next right move, not instead of wisdom, but alongside it. I want to speak to those of you carrying an invisible illness, the kind that does not show up clearly on a scan or a blood test, where you look fine to everyone around you while you are privately managing pain, fatigue, or symptoms that make ordinary days feel like enormous effort. I think of the woman who had been bent over for 18 years, unable to straighten herself up at all, a condition the text describes as caused by a crippling spirit. She did not ask me for healing. She was simply there in the synagogue, likely used to being overlooked because of how her body had shaped her posture and her place among people. I saw her, called her forward, and told her she was set free from her infirmity, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. I want you to hear that I called her forward before she asked. Sometimes you have been so used to enduring quietly and invisibly that you have stopped expecting to be noticed at all. I am noticing you in this message the same way I noticed her in that synagogue, without you having to ask first. I want to speak to those of you facing a diagnosis considered incurable, where even the medical language used to describe it has started to feel like a life sentence rather than a treatable condition. I think of Naaman, a commander of great reputation in Aram, afflicted with leprosy, a condition with no cure available to him despite all his wealth, power, and military success. He was told, through a servant girl who had been taken captive from Israel, about a prophet who could heal him, and when he finally came seeking help, he was instructed simply to wash 7 times in the Jordan River, an instruction so unremarkable that he almost refused it out of pride, expecting something more dramatic. When he finally obeyed, his skin was restored, becoming like the skin of a young child. Sometimes the path to your healing will not look as dramatic or complicated as you expect. I am not always going to ask you to do something impressive. Sometimes I will simply ask for humble, ordinary obedience, the same way I asked it of Naaman. I want to speak now to the caregivers among you, the ones who have spent so long tending to someone else's illness that your own body and spirit have quietly started to break down under the weight of it, and no one has thought to ask how you are doing because all the attention understandably goes to the person who is sick. I see you specifically in this message. Martha and Mary sent for me when their brother Lazarus was dying, and in the days that followed, while managing their own grief and the arrangements around his death, they were also managing an entire household of visitors and mourners who had come to comfort them, a heavy responsibility layered on top of already unbearable grief. I am not asking you to keep pouring out endlessly without receiving anything back. Come to me in the exhaustion of caregiving the same way Martha and Mary did, honestly, even with complaint, and I will meet you there the same way I met them. I want to speak to the fear some of you feel about what a future diagnosis might reveal, the anxiety of upcoming scans or appointments that has started to consume more of your mental energy than the actual illness itself. I think of the official whose son was close to death in Capernaum, who came to me in Cana, begging me to come down and heal him before he died, clearly terrified by how quickly time was running out. I told him, "You may go, your son will live," without even traveling to see the boy myself. He believed the word I spoke and started his journey home, and on the way his servants met him with the news that his son had recovered at the exact hour I had spoken those words. I am asking you to trust the word I speak over your fear the same way that official trusted it, even before you have physical proof in front of you, even while you are still on the road home not yet certain of the outcome. I want to speak now to those of you who have prayed for healing already, multiple times, and have grown quietly discouraged that the prayer does not appear to have worked yet, wondering if you are doing something wrong or if healing prayers are simply not meant for you. I think of the blind man at Bethsaida, brought to me by people who begged me to touch him. I spit on his eyes, put my hands on him, and asked if he could see anything. He said he could see people, but they looked like trees walking around, an incomplete healing, blurry and unfinished. I did not walk away from him at that partial result. I put my hands on his eyes a second time, and then he saw everything clearly. I want you to notice that healing does not always arrive complete on the first attempt in your experience of it, even when it is genuinely from me. If your healing so far feels blurry, partial, or incomplete, I am not finished. I am asking you to let me touch it again rather than assuming the first attempt was the only chance you get. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of chronic illness, the friendships that have quietly faded because you cannot keep up with the pace of healthy people's lives anymore, the events you have had to decline so many times that people eventually stopped inviting you at all. I think of the 10 men with leprosy who called out to me from a distance, kept apart from town and from healthy community by the same law that had exiled the man I healed earlier. I told them to go show themselves to the priests, and as they went, they were cleansed. Only one of them, a Samaritan, came back to thank me, and I asked where the other 9 were. I want you to notice that I healed all 10 regardless of who returned to say thank you. I am not withholding your healing based on how well you have managed to stay grateful or connected through this illness. But I do want you to know that the one who came back received something the other 9 did not, a deeper acknowledgement from me, and I am inviting you into that same fuller relationship, not just the physical healing but the return to gratitude and closeness with me that goes beyond it. I want to speak now to those of you dealing with a mental or emotional condition alongside a physical one. Anxiety or depression tangled together with chronic pain or illness in a way that makes it hard to tell where one problem ends and the other begins. I want you to know I do not separate your mind from your body the way modern medicine sometimes has to for practical treatment purposes. I healed people of physical ailments and spoke peace over their inner turmoil in the same breath more than once. When I calmed the storm on the sea, the disciples were physically safe and I still asked them why they were so afraid, addressing both the external danger and the internal fear together. I am not asking you to separate what is happening in your mind from what is happening in your body when you bring it to me. Bring me the whole tangled situation, exactly as it is. I want to speak to the specific frustration of a condition that has responded to treatment before, giving you hope of full remission, only to return again later, forcing you to start the entire difficult process over from the beginning. I think about how, even after healing many people during my ministry, sickness and death continued to exist in the world until the fuller victory over sin and death that came through the cross and resurrection. Complete, final, permanent healing of every kind is part of what is still being fully worked out in this world, and I do not want you to lose hope simply because a remission did not turn out to be permanent this time. I am not finished working, even in the return of something you thought was gone. Bring it back to me again with the same expectation you brought the first time. I want to speak to the anger you may feel toward me specifically for allowing a body you love, maybe even your own body, to suffer this long without a resolution, especially if you have watched someone you love in real pain with no clear end in sight. I am not offended by that anger. When Lazarus died, even though I already knew I was about to raise him from death within minutes, I wept alongside his grieving sisters and their friends, entering fully into the sorrow of the moment even while holding the power to reverse it entirely. Your anger and your grief over unresolved suffering do not push me away. I remain close to you inside of it, weeping with you, even while working toward an outcome you cannot yet see. I want to speak to those of you who feel guilty for being sick, worried that your illness has become a burden on your family, your finances, or your ability to show up the way you used to for the people who depend on you. I want to release you from that guilt plainly. Your illness is not a moral failure, and your worth to the people who love you was never actually dependent on your productivity or your ability to serve them the way you once could. The paralyzed man lowered through the roof by his friends did not earn his healing through some display of worthiness. His friends carried him because they loved him, tearing a hole in someone else's roof to make it happen. And I healed him not because he had proven himself but because of the persistent love the people around him showed in bringing him to me. If you have people around you willing to carry you the way those friends did, let them. And if you do not feel like you have such people right now, know that I am carrying you myself even in their absence. I want to speak now to those of you afraid to hope for healing because you have been disappointed by unanswered prayers for it before, prayed over by well-meaning people whose confident predictions did not come true, leaving you more disillusioned than before they prayed. I understand that particular wound, the extra weight of disappointed expectations layered on top of the illness itself. I am not asking you to trust a formula, a specific prayer method, or a specific person's confident prediction. I am asking you to trust me directly, in whatever way you are able to right now, even a small and uncertain amount of trust. The way the father of a demon-possessed boy once cried out to me, "I believe, help my unbelief." That mixture of genuine belief and genuine doubt was enough for me to work with that day, and it is enough for me to work with in you today as well. I want to speak to the specific exhaustion of researching your own condition late at night, reading about worst-case outcomes, trying to prepare yourself for scenarios that have not happened yet and may never happen, borrowing tomorrow's fear today in an attempt to feel some sense of control over an uncontrollable situation. I told my disciples not to worry about tomorrow, because each day already carries enough of its own trouble, and I want to remind you of that instruction specifically tonight. When the late-night searching starts to feel more like preparation than the anxious spiral it actually is. Bring me today's version of this illness. I will meet you again tomorrow with tomorrow's version, whatever it turns out to be. I want to speak to those of you who are the one everyone else in the family looks to for strength during a health crisis, the one who makes the calls, manages the paperwork, coordinates the care, while quietly falling apart in private moments no one else witnesses. I am asking you to let me witness those private moments, the ones you do not show anyone else, the crying in the car before you walk back into the hospital room composed, the exhaustion you push through because everyone else seems to be relying on your strength. I see the full version of you, not just the composed one you present publicly, and I am not asking you to keep performing strength in front of me the way you have to in front of everyone else. I want to speak to those of you who received a diagnosis for someone you love before you were even ready to hear it, standing in a hallway or sitting in a small office while a doctor used words that changed everything in an instant, and you have replayed that exact moment over and over since then, wishing you could go back to the version of your life that existed before you heard it. I think of the centurion whose servant was paralyzed and suffering terribly at home, a man of authority who nevertheless came to me personally, humbly, on behalf of someone he cared for. He told me I did not even need to come to his house, that if I simply spoke the word, his servant would be healed, because he understood authority well enough to know that my spoken word carried the same weight as my physical presence. I told those standing near me that I had not found faith like that anywhere in Israel, and his servant was healed that very hour, without me ever entering the house. I want you to bring me the diagnosis of the person you love the same way that centurion did, with the same confidence that my spoken word over their situation does not require my physical presence in the room to take full effect. I want to speak to those of you grieving a loss that already happened, a death from illness that came despite every prayer, every treatment, every hope you held onto until the very end, and now you are left wondering what to do with unanswered prayers that did not get the ending you were asking for. I think of the widow at 9, walking behind the coffin of her only son, having already buried her husband earlier in life, now facing complete loss of the only family she had left. I saw her in that funeral procession, and my heart went out to her before she ever asked me for anything. I told her not to weep, then touched the coffin, and told the young man to get up, and he did, sitting up and beginning to talk, and I gave him back to his mother. I want you to know that even in the moments when illness has already taken someone you love, I am not indifferent to your grief, and I am the same one who has, throughout Scripture, shown that even death is not outside what I am able to reverse when it serves my purposes. I am not promising you every loss will be undone the way that widow's son was. But I am promising you that I saw her exact grief before she asked, and I see yours the same way right now. I want to speak to those of you who have watched an illness affect not just your body but your ability to communicate, to hear, to connect with the people you love in the ways you once did easily, whether through hearing loss, speech difficulties, or any condition that has made ordinary connection with others feel newly difficult. I think of the deaf man with a speech impediment who was brought to me, and I took him aside privately, away from the crowd, put my fingers in his ears, touched his tongue, looked up to heaven, sighed deeply, and said, "Be opened." Immediately his ears were opened and his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. I want you to notice that I took him aside privately first, away from the noise and attention of the crowd, before I did anything else. Sometimes what you need most is not a public display of healing but a private, personal moment with me, away from everyone else's expectations of how your healing should look or how quickly it should happen. I want to speak to those of you whose bodies have simply worn down slowly over years, not through one dramatic illness but through the accumulated weight of age, repeated injury, or a chronic condition that has gradually taken more and more from you, so slowly that you almost did not notice how much had changed until you looked back and realized how different your daily life has become. I think of the crowds at Gensaret who, when they recognized me, ran throughout the whole region carrying sick people on mats to wherever they heard I was, and begged me to let them touch even the edge of my cloak, and all who touched it were healed. I want you to notice the persistence in that scene, entire communities mobilizing themselves around the belief that even the smallest point of contact with me could reach the deepest, most gradual decline in a person's body. Whatever has been slowly worn down in you over years, even the edge of my presence reaching into it is enough to begin reversing what took a long time to happen. I want to speak to those of you whose condition affects your hands, your ability to work, to create, to provide for yourself or your family in the ways you were used to, and the frustration of watching a body part that once served you reliably become a source of limitation instead. I think of the man with a shriveled hand who came into the synagogue on the Sabbath, watched carefully by religious leaders looking for a reason to accuse me of breaking their rules. I asked him to stand up in front of everyone, then asked the room whether it was lawful to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill, and when they remained silent, angry at their hardness of heart, I told the man to stretch out his hand. As he stretched it out, it was completely restored. I want you to notice that I healed him in front of people who wanted me to fail, who were hoping for a reason to condemn what I was doing. I am not waiting for a safe, private, comfortable moment to move on your behalf. I am willing to move even in front of the skeptics and the critics in your life, the ones who are quietly waiting to see if this will actually work for you. I want to speak to those of you managing a fever, an infection, an illness that has kept you confined to bed, unable to do even the simple daily tasks you once took entirely for granted, watching the world continue on without you while you are stuck in a room recovering. I think of Peter's mother-in-law, lying in bed with a high fever, and I went to her, took her by the hand, and helped her up, and the fever left her immediately, so completely that she got up at once and began to serve those in the house. I want you to notice how immediately and fully her strength returned, not a slow trickle of recovery but a complete return to normal function in a single moment. I am not limited to gradual healing only. Sometimes I move all at once, restoring not just the absence of illness but the full return of your strength and your capacity to engage with life again. I want to speak to those of you who have started to wonder whether your prayers for healing even reach me anymore, whether you have prayed so many times about the same condition that the prayers themselves have started to feel more like habit than genuine hope, going through the motions because stopping feels like giving up entirely. I want you to know that even repetitive, tired, half-hopeful prayers still reach me completely. The friends who lowered the paralyzed man through a roof did not offer an eloquent or original prayer. Their persistence itself was the prayer, expressed through action rather than words, and I responded to the effort and the faith behind it. Rather than requiring some particular level of eloquence or freshness in how it was expressed. However tired or repetitive your prayers about this illness have become, I am not measuring them against some standard of freshness. I am receiving every one of them exactly as they are. I want to speak to the specific fear of becoming a burden as an illness progresses, of needing more help than you were comfortable asking for, of watching people you love rearrange their lives around your care in ways that fill you with gratitude and guilt in equal measure. I want you to release yourself from the guilt portion of that particular weight. Throughout my ministry, people who loved someone sick did not treat the effort of caring for them as a burden to resent, but as an expression of love they were glad to offer, the way the friends of the paralyzed man tore open a roof without hesitation, the way the woman with the bleeding condition was surrounded by a crowd that did not turn her away despite the inconvenience of her interruption. Let the people who love you carry some of this weight without treating their willingness to do so as evidence that you have become too much for them. I want to speak to those of you who feel like your illness has become the primary way people identify you now, where conversations with friends and family always circle back to your condition, your treatment, your latest results, until you have started to feel like a diagnosis walking around in a body rather than a whole person who happens to also be sick. I want you to remember that I never once addressed the people I healed by their condition alone. I did not call the woman with the bleeding disorder the bleeding woman when I spoke to her. I called her daughter. I did not refer to the man born blind only by his blindness. I saw the whole of who he was, his story, his family, his future, even while addressing the specific physical need in front of me. Your illness is a real part of your current experience, but it has never been the whole of how I see you, and I am asking you to resist letting it become the whole of how you see yourself either. I want to speak to the specific weariness of insurance calls, appointment scheduling, medication management, and all the administrative weight that comes with chronic or serious illness. The parts of this journey that rarely get mentioned in stories about faith and healing but that quietly consume enormous amounts of your time and energy every single week. I want you to know that I am present in the mundane, exhausting logistics of managing an illness, not only in the dramatic moments of prayer or the eventual moment of breakthrough. The widow who kept appearing before the unjust judge, asking again and again for justice, was engaged in a mundane, repetitive, unglamorous kind of persistence, and I used her story to teach that persistent, ordinary faithfulness in seeking help does not go unnoticed or unrewarded. Every phone call, every form, every reminder you have set for medication, all of it is part of a faithfulness I see clearly, even when it does not feel spiritual in the moment. I want to speak to those of you whose condition has changed your relationship with food, whether through necessary dietary restrictions, loss of appetite from treatment, or the simple exhaustion of having to think carefully about every single meal in a way healthy people never have to consider. Think about how, after I raised Jairus' daughter from death, one of the first things I did was tell her parents to give her something to eat, a remarkably practical instruction in the middle of what had just been a miraculous moment. I care about the practical, physical details of your recovery as much as I care about the miraculous parts, the ordinary provision of nourishment alongside the extraordinary restoration of life and strength. Bring me the frustration of your relationship with food during this illness, not just the illness itself. I want to speak to those of you supporting a spouse through illness, watching vows about sickness and health become suddenly, concretely real in ways you did not fully anticipate when you first spoke them, adjusting your entire shared life around treatment schedules, side effects, and uncertainty about the future you had planned together. I think of how, even while carrying the weight of my own coming suffering, I made sure my mother would be cared for, entrusting her to John's care from the cross in one of my final acts before my death. Care for the people we love, even in the middle of our own hardship, was something I modeled personally, and I understand the weight of trying to hold both your own fear and your commitment to caring for someone else at the same time. I am carrying that dual weight with you. I want to speak to those of you who have found unexpected moments of laughter or ordinary joy even in the middle of a hard health season, and then felt guilty about it afterward, as though enjoying anything while sick or while caring for someone sick is somehow inappropriate or disloyal to the seriousness of the situation. I want to release you from that guilt specifically. Even in the middle of intense grief at Lazarus' tomb, there was still a wedding at Cana where I turned water into wine so the celebration could continue without embarrassment. Sorrow and joy have always been able to exist in the same season, even the same day, without one canceling out the legitimacy of the other. Let yourself laugh when something is funny, even now. It is not a betrayal of how seriously you are taking this illness. I want to speak to those of you who are afraid of becoming defined by fear itself after this illness, worried that even if your body heals, the anxiety this experience has created in you will linger indefinitely, making you someone who flinches at every new symptom or ache for the rest of your life. I want you to know that healing, as I offer it, is not only physical. Peace is part of what I restore alongside the body. After I calmed the storm on the sea, I did not simply leave my disciples safely on the shore still trembling. I addressed their fear directly, asking why they were so afraid, inviting them into a settled trust that outlasted that particular storm. I am not only interested in resolving this specific illness. I am interested in healing the fear it has planted in you as well, so that you are not held hostage by anxiety about the next thing long after this particular battle has ended. I want to close by speaking directly to the specific number attached to your situation, whatever it is. The number of years you have been sick, the number of treatments you have tried, the number on a recent lab report, the number of specialists who have told you they are not sure what else to do. I want you to remember the woman whose bleeding lasted 12 years, the man whose paralysis lasted 38 years, Naaman's condition that had no cure available anywhere in his kingdom despite his wealth and influence. Every number that seemed insurmountable in Scripture was still within reach of a single encounter with me. Your number, whatever it is not an exception to that pattern. I want to speak to those of you facing a surgery on the calendar, watching the date approach with a mixture of hope for what it might fix and dread of the procedure itself, the anesthesia, the recovery, the uncertainty of how your body will respond. I want you to bring me that specific date, that specific fear of the unknown hours you will not be conscious for, the same way people brought me their sick before any procedure existed to help them, trusting me with what they could not control themselves. I am present in operating rooms as much as I am present in prayer rooms, in the hands of the surgeons as much as in the hands lifted in prayer for you outside those doors. Bring me the date on your calendar specifically, by name, the way you would bring me any other fear. I want to speak to those of you managing a condition that came from something in your family line, watching patterns repeat across generations and wondering whether you are simply destined to experience the same suffering your parent or grandparent experienced, as though genetics alone determines the entirety of your story. I want you to know that while I do not deny the reality of inherited conditions, I am not limited by inheritance the way medicine sometimes has to treat it as a fixed variable. Entire family lines throughout Scripture experienced dramatic reversals of patterns that seemed set in stone, barrenness that had persisted for generations suddenly broken, curses that seemed inherited suddenly stopped. Whatever pattern runs in your family, I am able to be the one who interrupts it in your specific life, regardless of how many generations before you experienced it differently. I want to speak to the specific frustration of alternative or complementary approaches to healing that you have tried alongside conventional medicine, wondering if you are doing too much, too little, or somehow the wrong combination of things, second-guessing every choice you have made about how to pursue your own recovery. I want to relieve you of some of that particular anxiety. I am not keeping a scorecard of which methods you chose to pursue your healing through, as long as they are honest and wise. What matters most to me is not the precise combination of treatments you selected but the posture of your heart toward me while you pursue them, whether you are leaning on me throughout the process or trying to manage all of it entirely in your own strength, forgetting to invite me into the decision-making at all. I want to speak to the specific moment when a health scare passes and you receive good news, relief flooding through you, and then, only days or weeks later, an unexpected wave of delayed emotion arrives, tears you did not expect, and exhaustion that only shows up once the immediate danger is over and your body finally has permission to feel everything it postponed feeling during the crisis itself. That delayed emotional release is not a sign that something is still wrong. It is simply your body and your spirit finally processing what they did not have the capacity to process while they were focused entirely on survival and treatment. Let that delayed grief or relief move through you without judging yourself for not having felt it sooner. I want to speak to those of you who have become, without ever asking for the role, an unofficial advocate and researcher for your own condition or for someone else's, learning more about a specific illness than you ever expected to know, becoming the one who catches things doctors miss simply because you have had to become an expert out of necessity. I honor that effort. It is exhausting to have to become your own advocate inside a medical system that does not always move as quickly or carefully as you need it to. I am with you in every appointment where you have had to push back, ask a second question, request a second opinion, or simply insist on being taken seriously when you were not initially being heard. I want to speak to those of you who have quietly started bargaining with me, promising a version of a changed life, more faithfulness, more service, more devotion, if only this particular healing would come through, as though I require a trade before I am willing to move on your behalf. I want to release you from that bargaining entirely. My willingness to heal was never contingent on what you could offer me in return. I healed people who never went on to follow me faithfully afterward, and I healed people who did, with no difference in how freely or fully the healing itself was given in the moment. Bring me your need without the bargain attached. I am not waiting for your best behavior before I move. I am moving because I love you, the same way I moved for the leper, the paralyzed man, and the bleeding woman, none of whom had proven anything to me first. I want to speak to the specific hope some of you are almost afraid to name out loud, the full recovery, the complete remission, the healing so total that this entire season becomes a story you tell rather than a reality you are still living inside. I want you to name that full hope anyway, plainly, without softening it into something smaller and safer to avoid disappointment. Every person healed in Scripture who received a complete restoration first had to bring me a complete, specific request rather than a vague, hedged one. The blind men who called out to me on the road did not ask for improved vision or partial sight. When I asked what they wanted, they said plainly, "Lord, we want our sight." I want you to bring me the full version of what you actually want, not the cautious, hedged version you have trained yourself to ask for instead in order to protect your heart from disappointment. I want to speak to those of you who feel like this illness has stolen years from your life that you can never get back, milestones missed, opportunities passed over because your body was not able to participate in them, a version of your life you feel robbed of that healthy people around you never had to sacrifice. I want you to remember that I do not simply erase lost time. I have a history of redeeming it, of giving back more than what was taken, the way Job's final years were blessed even more abundantly than his earlier ones after everything he lost, the way Joseph's years in slavery and prison became the exact preparation for the influence he would eventually carry. I am not promising you an identical restoration of the specific years that were taken. I am promising you that lost time, brought to me honestly, does not simply disappear into permanent loss. It becomes part of a story I am still writing with you. I want to speak to those of you who have noticed small signs of improvement that feel almost too small to mention to anyone, a slightly better day, a symptom that was slightly less severe than the week before, an energy level that lifted just a little, and you have hesitated to hope too much about it because you do not want to be disappointed if it turns out to be temporary. I want you to bring those small signs to me and let them count as real progress rather than dismissing them as insignificant. The mustard seed I described as the smallest of seeds still grew into the largest of garden plants, and I used that image specifically to teach that small beginnings are not evidence of a small outcome. Notice the small improvement. Thank me for it specifically. Let it build your expectation rather than talking yourself out of trusting it. I want to speak, finally, to those of you who have started to measure your faith by whether or not the healing has come yet, quietly wondering if your continued illness is somehow evidence that you have not believed correctly or prayed hard enough, a burden that adds spiritual guilt on top of an already heavy physical one. I want to release you from that measurement entirely. Faith was never meant to be graded by outcomes you cannot control. Paul asked me 3 times to remove a physical thorn in his flesh, and I did not remove it, telling him instead that my grace was sufficient for him, that my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul's faith was not diminished by that unanswered request. If your healing has not arrived on the timeline you hoped for, that delay is not a verdict on the quality of your faith. It is simply where you currently are in a story I am still writing. I want to speak to those of you sitting with this message on a device in a waiting room right now. The fluorescent lights overhead, the quiet hum of a place you did not choose to be in but have to be in anyway, waiting for a name to be called or a number to be counted. I want you to know I am sitting in that waiting room with you, in the plastic chair beside you, in the silence before the appointment, in the specific version of dread that comes with waiting rooms in particular. You are not waiting alone, even when it feels like the loneliest kind of waiting there is. I want to speak to those of you who feel embarrassed by how much this particular illness has consumed your conversations, your thoughts, your prayers, worried that you have become someone people privately grow tired of hearing about it from, even though the illness itself has not asked your permission before taking up this much space in your life. I want you to release that embarrassment. The persistent widow in the parable I told was not gently reminding the judge once and then moving politely on to other topics. She kept coming, repeatedly, insistently, about the exact same request, and I held her up as an example of the kind of persistence I honor rather than the kind I grow tired of. Keep bringing this to me as many times as you need to, in as much detail as you need to, without editing yourself down to a version that feels more socially convenient. I want to speak, one last time, to whatever specific fear rose up in you the moment you started reading this message, the one you may not have named even to yourself yet. Name it now, silently or out loud, and know that I already knew it before you did, and I am not overwhelmed by it, no matter how large it feels to you tonight. I want to close this word by speaking to what comes next, because I know understanding is not enough on its own. I am asking you to do a few specific things. Bring me the specific diagnosis or symptom by name, plainly, the way the leper did when he said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Ask me the honest question underneath your fear, the same way the father of the demon-possessed boy did, admitting both your belief and your unbelief in the same breath. And whatever partial healing or improvement you have already experienced, however small, bring it back to me the way the once blind man at Bethsaida did, and let me touch it again rather than assuming the current level of improvement is the final result. There is one more thing I want you to carry from this message. Someone in your life is walking through a health struggle right now, either their own or someone they loves, and they need exactly what you have just heard. Reach out to them today, not with empty encouragement, but with the same specific hope I have just spoken over you. Tell them the 38 years was not too long for me, that the untouchable was not too unclean for my hand, that the report that sounded final was not the last word I was working from. Let this word move from your body into theirs. I am not finished with your healing, whatever stage it is currently in. What has lasted 38 years is not too long for me to reverse. What feels untouchable is exactly what draws my hand toward you. What sounds like a final report is not always the final word. And what feels blurry or incomplete is not the end of what I am doing in your body. I was willing for the leper. I was moved with compassion for the widow at 9. I turned back a second time for the man who could only see people as trees walking. I am willing, moved, and turning back for you in exactly the same way, today, in whatever room you are sitting in as you read this. Stay close to me. Your healing is not finished.